Greetings everyone, this is Connor from Dagora TV, and in this video I'm asking the question, should the Elder Scrolls 6 be set in the past? So the reason why I'm doing this video is because I got a comment on an old YouTube video of an old Elder Scrolls 6 video where I was asking the question, should the Elder Scrolls 6 be set before Skyrim was set? So I'm using that as the present for this video, Skyrim as being the last Elder Scrolls 6 game in the timeline really of what's been going on in the Elder Scrolls lore. So I'm just kind of saying, should it be set before then? Should it be set after then? It's kind of really going into the question of how going about it, because traditionally the episodic games of the Elder Scrolls series, you know, 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5, have gone after each other. You know, you've had Arena, first, and then Daggerfall later on in the timeline, then Morrowind, then Oblivion, then Skyrim. So I just kind of had it kind of set me thinking down a whirlwind of what game, where I'd like it to be set for the next Elder Scrolls 6 game, would I like it to be set in the past and all that kind of stuff. So I thought, let's go into it, let's dissect it a bit. So first thing I want to kind of establish is really the timeline of which we've kind of gone into areas of, you know, for the Elder Scrolls series, you know, where we've really been diving in. So in the main episodic games, so these are the main games in the series, the 5 main games that we've got. We've had Arena, which has been set in the 3rd era, 389. And then we had Daggerfall, which was set 16 years after that, which was the 3rd era, 405, which is pretty close to Arena. And then Morrowind, which was 22 years after Daggerfall, which was 3rd era, 427. And then we had Oblivion, which completely ended the 3rd era, which was the 3rd era, year 433. So over that we've really only covered about, well, less than 40 years even, which is kind of a remarkable area to see. You know, the 4 games kind of happened there. You know, there are a lot, you can do a lot in those games in Morrowind and Oblivion, so you can really kind of establish a lot. But then we got a real big break from the end of the 3rd era to going well into the 4th era with Skyrim, where Skyrim was set in 4th era, year 201, which is the biggest gap that we've had, you know, from between any of the Elder Scrolls games for the main episodic series. So as you can see, really they're kind of what's happening close to each other, and then a big jump to Skyrim, but they're all going further forward in time. But we do have the side Elder Scrolls games which do come out. We've had a few of them, and they tend to, you know, go back in time. They tend to happen at a different situation in time than what's really happened, you know, when the episodic games kind of not mess with the lore to kind of really show what's happening really. And what we've got is the Elder Scrolls Online was set in the 2nd era, year 582, which is a lot of time. You know, that's about 700 years before Oblivion and 1,000 years before Skyrim, about that. So that's a long way before, you know, those games were set. We've had Redguard, which was 2nd era, year 852, which is a whole 300 years after the Elder Scrolls Online. And then we've also had Elder Scrolls Legends, which is the most recent Elder Scrolls game to release, the card game, where the campaign is just a side story, which is actually set after Oblivion, but before Skyrim in the 4th era, year 175. So we can see this trend of really the side games kind of going back in time to not really falter with the lore, and then we've got the newer games kind of going forward to kind of progress the story and progress the lore even further forward, which is kind of the biggest point I wanted to make in this video. When these main games come out, for me personally, what I kind of look at is, again, to look to see how the world has kind of really changed since the last Elder Scrolls game, which, you know, you can get that if you go back in time. You know, if you go 1,000 years in the past or go into the 1st era or something like that, you are going to see how the world is different to that than what it is in Skyrim. Like, one of my favourite things to do in the Elder Scrolls Online when it came out was, as soon as I got to level 10, I ran into Cyrodiil. I went straight to Cyrodiil and looked at how different Cyrodiil was from Oblivion. And you can see these abandoned fortresses which were so, you know, what kind of wells sprung up in the Elder Scrolls Online, but then you go to them in Cyrodiil, in the Elder Scrolls Oblivion, and they're completely ransacked. They're just a little bit there, there's not much going on. Like, you could see rivers, which is just, you know, now just a small lake in Oblivion, and then in Elder Scrolls Online, you know, the flourishing and, you know, real different landscape and culture, which, you know, I know they did it differently for, you know, the game purposes and stuff like that, but as a keen-eyed player, it was kind of cool to see the similarities, and it was really cool to kind of run around in a different time period, a different era. It was kind of probably one of my favourite parts of playing Elder Scrolls Online, was seeing all the differences in how the world's kind of developed from that period, and then going 2 eras later, see how different it was in Skyrim even then, when, you know, I go seeing Windhelm being a much bigger city in the Elder Scrolls Online than what it is in Skyrim, which makes sense because we know that kind of Windhelm, we always hear in Skyrim about how it's kind of been dwindling down smaller and smaller and smaller. You know, the port was so small in Skyrim, whereas in Elder Scrolls Online it was huge, it was colossal, which was something that was really cool to kind of take part in that and really have a look at, and I thought it was really, really interesting. But, you know, bringing the game forward even more is what, going back to the original point I was making about what I like to do as a player, is really find out the new lore, like what's been happening between the gaps of these two games, like what was happening in between Oblivion and Morrowind, what happened in the gap between Skyrim and Oblivion, you know, whereas if you go back in time, it kind of feels like really that your story doesn't matter because you know what's going to happen further on down the line. Like, say for instance, if there was a dragon attack, okay, in a game. So let's say we had the story of Skyrim that was set in the third era 150, which is, you know, 200 years before Arena. And we know we've already played Arena, Daggerfall, Morrowind, and Oblivion, but we want to play the, you know, we've got this huge colossal threat coming to us. You can kind of predict the ending, which is, I know one of the major things that you can kind of say for any of these games, really, is, you know, you can predict the ending, that you're going to save the world and all that kind of stuff. But there's always that chance that they can do something really, really freaky, like I don't know, they can completely cut up the geography or something like that of the world, or, you know, something colossal could really happen at the end of the game, which completely changes everything about Tamriel. Which, if the game was set in the past, and we know what the game what Tamriel is like 200 years in the future, we know that that's not going to happen. It kind of minimises the errors of theory and what we think could possibly lead to in the game. Whereas if it's set after the fact of, you know, the most recent one, let's say it's set after Skyrim, then anything's possible. You know, anything's possible to what they can do with that story. You know, they can end the world if they wanted to, and, you know, maybe end the series. That is something that could possibly happen. And having really the openness for an ending so open like that, it's something that I really enjoy about going further forward. And it's something that I kind of want the next Elder Scrolls game to do. I don't really want it to come back and go back in time, because I want to see, you know, the different lore, what's happening in a different situation. Because a lot of the stuff that's really happened in the past, we can read about. You know, we've got an inkling to really see about what's happened in the game, and you can learn about what happened there. We already know, and we know what certain events lead to. So, say, like, for instance, I've outlined a couple of scenarios which I would kind of like to see, you know, in a side game in the future. But one of the examples I've got is the rise of Time Septim. You know, we know how that story ends. You know, we know what happens to Time Septim. We know he completely rules the whole completeness of Tamriel, a huge mammoth leader, and ends up becoming a deity. You know, we know what happens to that story. That's, you know, very short form. There's a lot of ins and outs of that. But we know what went down. Whereas if we, you know, a new leader propped up, you know, in a completely new game in the future, in this completely new area of law, we don't know if he's going to tragically die, we don't know if he's going to betray people, we don't know if he's going to completely rule Tamriel and invade the other continents. We don't know what's going to happen, and I kind of like exploring that area and exploring new periods of war, seeing what's happening with the armies in different countries around Tamriel and things like that, which is one of the major reasons of why I think the lore in Skyrim was such, you know, probably the best lore I played in the Elder Scrolls game, because when you go from Morrowind to Oblivion, the lore is pretty similar, you know, from those, in that 6-year period, you know, across the two games, because it's a very similar time frame, you know, like there's not a huge amount that's going to happen in between those 6 years. What you're really learning is about the worlds that you're in right now, and it kind of adds a bit more flesh to it in Oblivion when you're going out seeking lore. Whereas in Skyrim, because there's that much of a big gap in between, and you've had a whole era pretty much finished, and you've got to see the impact of that straight after. You know, we kind of really learn what went on with the character that we play in Oblivion. We've got to find out what really went on with the armies and everything from Oblivion onwards. We've got to really we've got to see what's really been the fallout of that. And, you know, in Skyrim, seeing the whole thing about the White Gold Concordat and everything that's happened with the armies, and seeing the different positions of power, and seeing what's been going on with Morrowind recently and things like that, it's cool to see. We kind of see that the country's kind of on a position that could lead to war right now, and something that we could really kind of push forward and go into and explore. And I found reading all about that and seeing what really went down between the two games is really interesting. So it's kind of part of me thinks that in the next Elder Scrolls game, it wouldn't go off this trend what people are thinking, like, yeah, we want to see this fight happening with the Old Mirror Dominion against, you know, the Empire and things like that, fighting with each other. We want to see that in the next game. But then part of me thinks, like, wouldn't it be cool to go another 200-300 year gap in front and then we can really read about every single intricacy of the event of that, the fallout of that, and everything. It would be really interesting to see, which is someone as me and people like me as lore hunters would probably cherish, because then you shot straight into a completely different scenario, and you could see everything that happened with the past one. Whereas I think a lot of the major player base will want to really play that event themselves, really, and kind of see with their own eyes instead of having to go and dig and read for it, which isn't something that's that popular as a game style, really. But I think that they've got a nice trend of the Elder Scrolls games, of the main series featured ones being going forward and going back in time for the side ones. So I think for the side games in future, because they're going to be doing more and more of them, because Elder Scrolls is such a big franchise, you know, and they've all done so well, you know, these side games. Elder Scrolls Online doing very well right now. Very good subscriber numbers, a lot of people playing the game, really liking it. Morrowind is going to sell very, very well for them. Very much looking forward to giving that a go. The Elder Scrolls Legends as well has kind of exceeded my expectations for how well that game was going to do. You know, they've got a lot of pro players coming over there, and it's kind of really developing an esports scene over there for Elder Scrolls Legends. That's doing really well for them, and a lot of people are playing that game. And you know, I just kind of wanted to see. I had a bit of an idea of what areas in time I want them to go back into, and what we could really explore in the past, really, you know, in these other side games. And I got 3, which I thought I trimmed it down to 3 to kind of keep the video a contained period of time. And the 3 that I've got is, the first one I've got is the secondary year 670, which is the rise of Tiber Septim, and you know, kind of what comes on from that. I'd love this to be a step for the Elder Scrolls series to go into the third-person action game area, or maybe even this could even be the whole grand strategy area, you know, Elder Scrolls. You know, maybe do like a civilization type Elder Scrolls game, as where you play as Tiber Septim commanding your armies, and later on in his lifestyle. I think that'd be kind of cool to see. I think that'd be really interesting to play through. I think, you know, such a really intricate story, such a fascinating story, which I'd love to learn a bit more about, but I think it'd be great to play through that, because it's such really a landmark area in the Elder Scrolls lore. Landmark point, you know, if you look at any videos, you know, there's some fantastic videos online where it shows what the kind of territories were like in the Elder Scrolls world, on the map of Tamriel, and you're kind of all dotting around a little bit of peeking up here and there, and then once Tiber Septim comes in, the whole map is ruled by the Empire, which is really, it's just cool to see how that kind of really happened on. The next one, what I've got is the first era year 700, which is the fall of the Dwemer, the disappearance of the Dwemer. I know it's a cool mystery, and if there was going to find out ever what was going to happen to the Dwemer, I'd like it to be in a game. I'd like to see it in a game. I don't want to read about it in some history book of final thing of what's happening, because it's such a mammoth event that people want to find out. The fall of the Dwemer would be really cool to see. We'll see really what went on there. You know, were they tinkering around with Daedric abilities or Aedric powers and they were just completely wiped out from the world, or was it, you know, a mysterious volcanic explosion? What went down? What happened? You know, I just really want to see, and I'm looking forward to kind of finding out a bit more about that. And then the last one that I've got is the inception of the Dark Brotherhood. The Dark Brotherhood, very much, and it is the most favoured guild in the Elder Scrolls lore. You know, like, everyone loves the Dark Brotherhood. It's the first story they want to jump at and play through. So just kind of seeing the inception of that and kind of seeing the first formation of that guild would be cool to play through, and really nice to see. So, thanks a lot for watching this video. So please let me know if the game was going to go back in time. You know, where would you like the game to play through? And, you know, what events would you like to see? What people would you like to play through and stuff like that? I think that'd be kind of really cool to, you know, talk about, have a bit of debate about which periods of lore would be a cool area to play through as a side game. But do you like my reasoning for why I want the games to go forward? Do you know, is that something you kind of agree with? Going forward, kind of new batches of lore and stuff is kind of really interesting and everything. Please let me know what you think. Follow me on Twitter, DegoraC. Make sure you hit subscribe to find out more Elder Scrolls 6 content coming out, and Elder Scrolls discussion on the channel as well. And I'll see you guys later. Goodbye.